Commander Jinwoo Kim looked out the small window of the transport shuttle. Space stretched endlessly in all directions, filled with more stars than he could count. But today something else caught his attention. Two massive fleets hung in the darkness like sleeping giants. On the left side, the Vorthan Empire's ships gleamed like precious crystals. Each vessel was smooth and curved, glowing with soft blue light. They moved in perfect harmony, almost like they were dancing together in the void. On the right, the Nexus Coalition fleet looked completely different. Their ships were dark metal, sharp and angular. Red lights blinked along their hulls in steady patterns. Everything about them screamed efficiency and cold logic. Between these two mighty forces sat Concordia Station, a neutral meeting place that neither side could attack. It was here that Jinwoo and his small team would spend the next few weeks. "First time seeing fleets this big?" asked Lieutenant Sora Park, sitting across from him. She was young but smart, with quick eyes that missed nothing. "Not this close," Jinwoo replied. "Makes you realize how small we are in comparison." Sergeant Miho Choi looked up from his tablet. "The files say they've been fighting for 30 years. 30 years and nobody's winning." "That's why we're here," said Specialist Hannah Lee quietly. "The Galactic Council thinks fresh eyes might help." Lieutenant Yuna Shin laughed softly. "Fresh eyes? That's a nice way of saying they think we're too primitive to take sides." Jinwoo nodded. The other species in the galaxy saw humans as newcomers. Earth had only joined the galactic community 50 years ago. Most aliens viewed humans as curious but harmless creatures who were good at keeping records but not much else. The shuttle docked with Concordia Station with a soft thud. As they gathered their equipment, Jinwoo reminded his team of their mission. "Remember, we're here as neutral observers. We document their meetings and strategies. Nothing more. The Council wants unbiased records of how both sides think and plan." The airlock hissed open and they stepped onto the station. The main corridor was enormous, with ceilings that stretched up into shadows. Beings from dozens of different species walked past them, paying little attention to the small group of humans. Council Mediator Thresh was waiting for them. The tall, gray-skinned alien had 4 arms and eyes that seemed to look in multiple directions at once. When he spoke, his voice sounded like wind through metal pipes. "Humans," he said, not bothering to hide his lack of enthusiasm. "You are here to observe and record. The war room contains sensitive military information. You will not interfere. You will not offer opinions. You will simply watch and take notes." "Understood," Jinwoo replied formally. They followed Thresh through the winding corridors of the station. Along the way they passed other areas where different species conducted their business. But the war room was in a special section, heavily guarded and isolated from the rest of the station. "Both sides have agreed to your presence," Thresh explained as they walked. "The Vorthans believe you are too young a species to understand their advanced strategies. The Nexus considers you irrelevant to their calculations. This makes you perfect neutral observers." Sora and Miho exchanged a quick glance. Being underestimated might actually work in their favor. They reached a massive door that slid open with barely a sound. Beyond it lay the war room, a circular chamber filled with holographic displays showing star systems, fleet positions and tactical data. The room hummed with energy from all the advanced technology. On one side of the room stood the Vorthan delegation. They were tall and graceful, with skin that looked like polished crystal. Their movements were smooth and flowing, and when they spoke to each other, it sounded like singing. Their leader, High Commander Zelnara, was the most impressive of all, with crystalline armor that caught and reflected light in beautiful patterns. On the other side were the Nexus representatives. These beings had once been organic, but now they were more machine than flesh. Cables and wires were visible under their artificial skin. Their eyes glowed with electronic light, and when they communicated, it was through rapid bursts of data that sounded like static. "The human observers," announced Thresh to the room. Many of the aliens looked at them briefly before turning back to their work. Some didn't bother looking at all. Jinwoo felt his team spread out slightly behind him. Each of them had been chosen for specific skills. Sora was excellent with technology. Miho understood logistics and supply chains better than anyone. Hannah could read body language and emotional cues from almost any species. Yuna had a gift for seeing patterns where others saw chaos. "You may sit there," Thresh pointed to a small section with basic chairs and simple recording equipment. "Do not leave this area without permission." As they settled into their assigned space, Jinwoo watched both alien factions preparing for another strategic session. The Vorthans moved like water, flowing around their holographic displays. The Nexus beings stood rigid as statues, processing data at incredible speeds. Neither side paid any attention to the humans in the corner with their primitive tablets and recording devices. They had no idea that 5 human minds were already beginning to notice things that 30 years of war had failed to reveal. The observation had begun. The war room came alive with tension as the morning session began. High Commander Zelnara's voice filled the air with musical tones that somehow conveyed anger and frustration. The crystalline being gestured at the massive holographic display showing dozens of star systems. "Your forces retreat every time we advance toward the Kepler region," she sang in her harmonic language. "This cowardice will not win you the war." Strategist Prime Unit 7, the lead Nexus representative, responded with mechanical precision. "Retreat is efficient resource management. Your crystal ships waste energy on unnecessary displays of power." Jinwoo sat quietly in the corner with his team, apparently taking simple notes on his tablet. But his eyes were busy tracking everything else in the room. While the aliens argued about massive fleet movements and expensive superweapons, he noticed smaller things. The way Vorthan officers' armor dimmed slightly whenever certain star systems were mentioned. How Nexus units synchronized their optical displays every 47 minutes like clockwork. The micro-pauses in conversations when supply lines were discussed. Sergeant Miho Choi looked like he was just recording the obvious tactical discussions. But he was actually mapping something completely different. His tablet showed supply routes, maintenance schedules and resource allocation patterns that the arguing aliens barely mentioned. "Notice the energy fluctuations?" whispered Specialist Hannah Lee so quietly only her teammates could hear. Her job was supposed to be recording emotional responses, but she was seeing much deeper patterns in behavior. Lieutenant Yuna Shin nodded almost imperceptibly. She had spent the last hour watching how both sides moved around the holographic displays. The Vorthans always avoided certain areas of the room when specific topics came up. The Nexus beings had subtle tells in their body language that revealed stress patterns. Meanwhile, the argument in the center of the room grew more heated. The aliens were debating whether to commit their reserve fleets to a massive offensive in the Outer Rim territories. The 7th Fleet could break their defensive line, insisted a younger Vorthan officer, his crystal armor flashing bright colors with excitement. "We have the firepower advantage." "Firepower means nothing without logistics," countered a Nexus tactical unit. "Your ships require rare crystal fuel. Our calculations show insufficient supply for sustained operations." Lieutenant Sora Park's fingers moved quickly across her tablet, but she wasn't recording this obvious exchange. She was tracking communication patterns, noting how information flowed between different units, identifying potential weak points in their command structure. The debate continued for hours, with both sides focusing on grand strategies and massive military operations. They spoke of planet-killer weapons, shield technologies that could protect entire solar systems, and fleet movements involving millions of soldiers. But while they argued about these enormous concepts, the humans were cataloging the small details that really mattered. Miho observed that Vorthan supply ships always arrived late when delivering to 3 specific sectors. Not because of enemy action, but due to some internal scheduling conflict nobody seemed to acknowledge. The Nexus, meanwhile, had a curious gap in their communication network that appeared every few days during what looked like routine maintenance. Hannah watched the aliens' emotional responses carefully. The Vorthans became noticeably uncomfortable whenever deep space mining was mentioned. Their harmonious tones would shift to more discordant frequencies. The Nexus beings showed increased optical flickering when their quantum communication array was discussed, suggesting system stress. Yuna mapped the room's dynamics with the eye of someone trained to see patterns. She noticed that certain Vorthan officers always moved to the far side of the room during specific planning phases. Nexus units had predictable rotation schedules that created temporary blind spots in their collective intelligence. "The Meridian offensive failed because you did not coordinate properly," High Commander Zelnara was saying, her voice rising to an almost angry melody. "Coordination was optimal," Unit 7 replied coldly. "Your forces withdrew without warning, leaving our left flank exposed." As the aliens blamed each other for past failures, Sora quietly documented something much more interesting. Both sides had communication protocols that created vulnerable windows during shift changes. The Vorthan's harmonic communication system had interference patterns. The Nexus network had synchronization delays. Jinwoo continued taking notes that looked completely ordinary to any observer. His tablet screen showed simple summaries of the tactical discussions. But the real analysis was happening in his head, connecting dozens of tiny observations into a larger picture. Neither alien faction paid any attention to the human observers in the corner. Why would they? These primitive beings with their basic recording equipment couldn't possibly understand the sophisticated military strategies being discussed. The humans were just there to write down what happened, nothing more. The Vorthans saw them as harmless creatures incapable of grasping advanced crystal technology. The Nexus considered them statistically irrelevant to strategic calculations. Both sides continued their heated debates about superweapons and fleet movements, never noticing that 5 human minds were quietly dissecting their entire military structure. By the end of the session, the aliens had accomplished little except arguing about the same strategies they had been debating for decades. But the humans had gathered something far more valuable. They had begun to see the patterns hidden in the chaos. That evening, the human team gathered in their small quarters aboard Concordia Station. The room was simple and plain compared to the advanced facilities given to the alien delegations. But for what they needed to do, it was perfect. Jinwoo spread his tablet across the basic table they had been given. The others did the same, connecting their devices to create a larger display screen. To anyone watching, it would look like a simple review of the day's notes. The reality was far different. "Show me what you found," Jinwoo said quietly. Miho pulled up his supply chain analysis first. "The Vorthans have a serious problem they don't even know about," he began, highlighting several star systems on the map. "Their crystal ships need a rare mineral called xanthium to power their weapons. They mine it from only 4 planets. He pointed to the mining locations. "But look at this pattern. Every third cycle, their supply ships are delayed by exactly 18 hours. Not because of attacks or technical problems. It happens like clockwork." Sora leaned forward, studying the data. "What causes the delay?" "That's the interesting part," Miho continued. "I cross-referenced it with their cultural database. Every third cycle corresponds to what they call the harmonic convergence. It's a religious event where they stop all industrial activity to sing together." Yuna whistled softly. "So their entire war machine stops working because of a prayer meeting?" "Exactly. And they've been doing this for 30 years without realizing how predictable it makes them." Jinwoo nodded, making notes. "What about the Nexus?" Miho switched displays. "They have the opposite problem. Their efficiency is actually their weakness. Everything runs on perfect schedules, including their command network. But I noticed something during today's session. The display showed communication patterns between Nexus ships. Every 47 minutes, all their units synchronize their data systems. For exactly 14 minutes during this process, they operate on backup communication only. During those windows, they're essentially deaf and blind to coordination changes." Hannah pulled up her behavioral analysis. "Both sides have psychological blind spots too. The Vorthans get physically uncomfortable whenever anyone mentions deep space operations. Their body language completely changes." "Why would that matter?" asked Sora. "Because I did some research," Hannah explained, pulling up stellar charts. "The Vorthan Empire originally came from a planet with 3 suns. Deep space, with its cold darkness, goes against everything in their nature. They avoid it instinctively, even when it would give them strategic advantages." She highlighted several space routes that pass through dark regions between stars. "Look at these paths. They would cut travel time by 60%, but Vorthans never use them. They always take the longer routes that pass near star systems, even when it wastes fuel and time." Yuna spread her own analysis across the display. "The patterns go even deeper than that. I've been watching how they move in the war room itself. Both sides have unconscious habits that reveal their thinking." Her display showed a top-down view of the war room with movement patterns traced in different colors. Vorthans always move to the left side of the room when they're planning defensive actions. The right side when they're planning attacks. They don't realize they're doing it, but it's completely predictable. "And the Nexus?" Jinwoo asked. "They rotate positions every 12 minutes during discussions. But certain units always take the same spots when specific topics come up. Unit 7 always moves to the center when they're about to reveal important information. Unit 15 steps back when they're uncertain about data accuracy." Sora had been quiet during all this, working on her own analysis. Now she looked up with excitement in her eyes. "This is the best part. I've been tracking their communication systems, and both sides have massive vulnerabilities they're completely blind to." Her display showed network diagrams that looked like complex spider webs. The Vorthans use harmonic frequencies for their quantum communications. But certain sound combinations cause interference in their own systems. If you knew the right frequencies, you could jam their entire fleet communication with a simple broadcast. "And the Nexus?" Miho asked. "Even better. Their AI network has a single critical node that controls coordination between all units. They think it's protected because it's hidden inside their command ship. But I tracked the data flow patterns. One precise strike at the right moment would shut down their entire collective intelligence. Jinwoo leaned back in his chair, looking at all the information spread before them. 3 days of observation had revealed more critical weaknesses than 30 years of warfare had exposed. The amazing thing, he said slowly, is that none of this is secret information. We learned it all just by watching and listening during normal strategy meetings. They're so focused on the big picture that they can't see the small details that actually matter, Hannah observed. Yuna nodded. Humans evolved to notice patterns for survival. We had to track animal behavior, predict weather changes, find food sources. Our brains are built to see what others miss. So what do we do with all this? Sora asked. Jinwoo looked at his team thoughtfully. They had been sent to observe and record. But they had discovered something that could change the entire balance of power in the galaxy. The question was whether they should use it. Let's see how smart our alien friends really are, he said finally. Tomorrow we start asking questions. The next morning's war room session began like all the others. High Commander Zelnara and her crystal officers took their positions on one side, while Strategist Prime Unit 7 and the Nexus delegation arranged themselves on the other. The humans sat quietly in their corner, tablets ready, looking like simple note-takers. But today would be different. The offensive in the Tau sector requires immediate action, Unit 7 was explaining, its mechanical voice echoing in the large chamber. Our calculations show optimal strike probability during the next cycle. Jinwoo looked up from his tablet as if he had just thought of something. Excuse me, he said politely, raising his hand slightly. I hope you don't mind a question from an observer. Both alien factions turned to look at him. Most seemed surprised that the quiet human had spoken at all. Of course, High Commander Zelnar replied, her musical voice showing mild curiosity. What do you wish to know? Well, Jinwoo began, looking genuinely confused. I've been reviewing my notes from yesterday, and I noticed something interesting about timing. Unit 7, when you mentioned the optimal strike time, I couldn't help but notice it falls during what appears to be a regular maintenance period for your communication systems. The Nexus leader's optical sensors flickered rapidly. Maintenance periods are calculated for maximum efficiency. They do not interfere with operations. Oh, I'm sure they don't, Jinwoo replied quickly. I was just curious about the timing. 47 minutes every cycle if I recorded correctly? That seems like a very precise schedule. Unit 7's mechanical head tilted slightly. For the first time, other Nexus beings began looking at each other with what might have been concern. Lieutenant Sora Park chose that moment to ask her own innocent question. High Commander Zelnara, I hope you don't mind me asking about Vorthan navigation. I noticed your ships always take the longer routes between star systems. Is there a strategic reason for avoiding the direct paths through deep space? The crystal being's armor dimmed noticeably. Vorthan ships are designed for optimal performance near stellar radiation sources, she replied, but her harmonious voice had lost some of its confidence. That makes sense, Sora nodded agreeably. Though I was wondering if the fuel costs might be significant? My calculations suggest the longer routes use about 60% more energy. Several Vorthan officers exchanged glances. It was clear they had never considered this calculation before. Sergeant Miho Choi joined the conversation, looking at his tablet with apparent confusion. I've been trying to understand supply schedules, and I keep seeing these regular delays. Every third cycle, Vorthan supply ships arrive exactly 18 hours late. Is that related to some kind of tactical strategy? High Commander Zelnara's crystalline features showed obvious discomfort. Supply schedules are coordinated with cultural observances, she said carefully. Cultural observances? Miho pressed gently. That sounds fascinating. Do these observances require stopping industrial operations? The room fell silent. Every Vorthan officer was now staring at their commander, waiting for an answer that everyone suddenly realized was problematic. Specialist Hannah Lee picked up the momentum. Unit 7, I've been watching communication patterns and I noticed something curious. During your maintenance periods, your units seem to operate independently rather than as a collective. Is that intentional? Backup systems maintain adequate function, Unit 7 replied, but its voice carried less certainty than before. Adequate, yes, Hannah agreed. But I was wondering about coordination during those periods. If an emergency required immediate collective response, would the backup systems be sufficient? The question hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Every Nexus unit in the room began processing this possibility, their optical sensors flickering in rapid patterns. Lieutenant Yuna Shin decided it was time for her contribution. She looked at her tablet with innocent curiosity. I hope this doesn't sound silly, but I've been tracking movement patterns in this room, and I noticed something interesting. Hi Commander, your officers always move to different positions depending on whether you're discussing offensive or defensive strategies. Is that part of Vorthan tactical doctrine? Zelnara's armor flickered with what could only be described as embarrassment. Movement patterns are unconscious responses to strategic thinking. Unconscious. Yuna repeated with genuine interest. So it's predictable? That must make planning easier, since everyone knows their roles automatically. The implications of predictable behavior patterns struck the Vorthan delegation like a physical blow. Unconscious habits that could be read by enemies were not tactical advantages. They were fatal weaknesses. Unit 7, Jinwoo said, returning to his original target. I was reviewing your network architecture data from yesterday's presentation, and I have to admit, I'm impressed by the central coordination node. It must require enormous processing power to manage communication for entire fleets. Central coordination ensures optimal efficiency, Unit 7 confirmed, though its voice now carried a hint of uncertainty. It's amazing that one system can handle so much, Jinwoo continued admiringly. Though I imagine if anything happened to that central node, it would cause significant disruption? The mechanical being's optical sensors went completely dark for several seconds. The equivalent of a human holding their breath in horror. Backup systems? Unit 7 began, then stopped. Everyone in the room, alien and human alike, suddenly understood that backup systems would not be sufficient if the central coordination node failed. Around the room, both alien factions were beginning to see their own strategies with completely new eyes. Questions that had seemed innocent and curious were revealing flaws that 30 years of warfare had failed to expose. The humans continued taking their simple notes, looking like helpful observers who were just trying to understand. But with each innocent question, they were quietly dismantling the military confidence of the galaxy's two most powerful forces. The revolution had begun, one question at a time. 3 weeks had passed since the humans first entered the war room. The atmosphere on Concordia Station had changed completely. Where once there had been heated arguments and aggressive posturing, now there were quiet, worried conversations and careful planning sessions. The change had happened gradually, then all at once. After days of innocent questions from the human observers, both alien factions had begun to see their own strategies with completely new eyes. Every weakness the humans had pointed out became impossible to ignore. The Vorthans had quietly begun rescheduling their harmonic convergence ceremonies to avoid predictable supply disruptions. The Nexus had started developing redundant communication systems to eliminate their vulnerable maintenance windows. Both sides realized that continuing their war with such glaring weaknesses would be suicide. Jinwoo Kim packed his personal items into a simple travel bag while his team gathered their equipment. Their official mission was complete. They had observed, documented, and recorded everything the Galactic Council had requested. But they were leaving with much more than simple meeting notes. The ceasefire announcement came this morning, Lieutenant Sora Park reported as she sealed her data storage units. Both sides are calling it a strategic pause to evaluate new tactical considerations. Sergeant Miho Choi smiled as he closed his supply chain analysis files. Translation: they're too scared to fight now that they know how vulnerable they are. A soft chime indicated someone was requesting entry to their quarters. Jinwoo opened the door to find Council Mediator Thresh standing in the corridor. The tall alien's forearms were clasped behind his back, and his multiple eyes looked distinctly uncomfortable. The human delegation will depart in 2 hours, Thresh announced formally. Both factions have expressed satisfaction with your documentation services. We're glad we could help, Jinwoo replied politely. Thresh hesitated for a moment, then stepped closer. The ceasefire was unexpected, he said carefully. In 30 years of mediation, I have never seen both sides simultaneously decide to pause hostilities. Perhaps they simply realized that continued fighting wouldn't benefit anyone, suggested Lieutenant Yuna Shin innocently. The mediator's eyes focused on her with sharp intelligence. Yes, perhaps they did realize that. Your observations were quite thorough. Specialist Hannah Lee finished packing her behavioral analysis equipment. Inside the sealed containers were detailed psychological profiles of every major military leader from both factions. Information that could predict their responses to almost any strategic situation. Will there be any follow-up observation missions? Asked Miho, though he already knew the answer. I think not, Thresh replied quickly. Both sides have indicated they prefer to handle future negotiations without outside observers. An hour later, the human team made their way through Concordia Station's corridors toward the departure docks. Other aliens they passed looked at them with expressions that hadn't been there 3 weeks earlier. Instead of dismissive indifference, there was now cautious respect and perhaps a hint of fear. At the docking bay, High Commander Zelnara waited with a small group of Vorthan officers. Her crystalline armor was dim, lacking its usual brilliant glow. "Human observers," she said in her harmonic voice, though the musical tones carried undertones of uncertainty. "Your documentation was comprehensive." "Thank you, High Commander," Jinwoo replied formally. "We learned a great deal about Vorthan strategic thinking." The crystal being's armor flickered nervously. They both knew exactly what he meant by that statement. Strategist Prime Unit 7 approached from the other side of the docking bay, accompanied by several other Nexus units. Their optical sensors were dim, processing power clearly focused on internal calculations. "Human delegation," Unit 7's mechanical voice carried less confidence than before. "Your analytical capabilities exceeded initial parameters. We appreciate the opportunity to observe such advanced strategic planning," Sora replied pleasantly. The Nexus leader's sensors flickered rapidly. Advanced strategic planning that had been systematically dissected by 5 humans with basic recording equipment. As the human team boarded their departure shuttle, Jinwoo paused at the airlock and turned back to the assembled aliens. "Thank you all for allowing us to participate," he said. "It was truly educational." The shuttle door sealed, and within minutes they were moving away from Concordia Station. Through the small windows they could see both alien fleets still maintaining their positions, but the formations had subtly changed. Ships that had been arranged for immediate attack were now positioned defensively. "Mission accomplished," Yuna said quietly as they watched the station shrink behind them. Miho patted his sealed data containers. "Complete supply chain vulnerabilities for both civilizations." Hannah added, "Psychological profiles that predict leadership responses with 93% accuracy." Sora held up her communication analysis files. "Network architectures, command protocols, and system vulnerabilities." Jinwoo opened his personal tablet, which contained the master analysis combining all their findings. It was a comprehensive guide to defeating the 2 most powerful military forces in the galaxy. Not through superior weapons or larger fleets, but by exploiting the weaknesses that their own sophistication had created. "The Council wanted neutral observations," he said thoughtfully. "They got exactly what they asked for." Behind them, on Concordia Station, both alien factions were beginning to understand what had really happened. The primitive humans hadn't just observed their war, they had dissected it completely. The species everyone had dismissed as harmless note-takers now possessed detailed knowledge of every critical vulnerability, every strategic blind spot, every way to bring down civilizations that had ruled the galaxy for centuries. The humans had been invited to watch. They were leaving with the coordinates to every weak spot in the galaxy's balance of power. And nobody could do anything about it.